This content is brought to you by Fisher Improvement Technologies Online, a learning platform that includes self-paced courses, knowledge sharing, and networking opportunities for safety, quality, and performance improvement professionals. Join now for free at online.improvewithfit.com.
This show is brought to you by Safety FM.
Over 25 years helping leaders reducing errors and incidents. Here is your host of the Essential Leadership Cycle podcast, Rob Fisher.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another round of the Essential Leadership Cycle podcast. I'm your host and intentional leader, Rob Fisher. And today we have a super guest, and that is the safety coach, Ian Collins. Ian and I go back quite a while now, probably 6 years, and we met through a mutual acquaintance and really liked the way each other approach technology. Ian's traveled all over the world. I'm going to let him kind of introduce himself, and then we'll get started. Ian, welcome to the Essential Leadership Cycle podcast.
Thank you, Rob. It's great to be here and great to be on the podcast, and looking forward to having a chat with you.
So tell us a little bit about yourself. You're the world's most interesting man. I don't know if you ever shaved your beard, if you still would be, but as of right now, you qualify.
Well, thank you. Where do I start? I come from Perth, Western Australia, and started my career in training and development, actually. And at the time in the early 2000s, West Australia was going through a big resource boom, and so I saw the opportunity to get involved in initially the mining game, and just ideally to make a quick buck and get out of the industry. And I went out on a diamond drilling rig operation, and I didn't have a clue what I was doing, and it took me about a week to figure out that we weren't in fact drilling for diamonds, but it was in reference to the drill bit that we were using, and that sort of gives you an idea of how they call it green I was. I was clueless, but I started to really enjoy it, and I'd never done anything sort of mechanical or anything like that before, and I had a ball, and it was just such a fascinating sort of world, a whole new world to me, and I guess after doing that for a couple of years and progressing through the ranks and becoming a driller, I eventually saw an opportunity offshore, mainly due to the fact that whatever you worked on an offshore drilling rig, that's how much time you had off, which was very different from mining. I was finding I was working a lot more than actually having any time off to enjoy the money that I was making. So went offshore, and again, really, really fell in love with that industry. And there was a couple of my first job in offshore drilling was actually up in the shipyards in Singapore, and there was an experience up there that had a profound impact on me, and that was there was a commotion on one of the vessels near us, and I sort of went over to have a look, and unfortunately one of the workers had fallen about 90 feet off some scaffolding, and saw the ambulance come in and pick him up, and within sort of minutes the whistle blew and everyone was back to work, and I couldn't quite believe what I'd just seen. And I remember going into the coffee shop and just saying to everyone, I think someone just died next door. And rather than there being any sort of shock, people just started recounting their death stories that they'd seen in the industry. And this really, really shocked me, that I was just joined this industry, that it was almost acceptable that death was going to happen. It was a dangerous sort of industry to be in. And ever since then, whilst I started offshore on the drilling side, I pivoted into the safety world because that was primarily where my passion was. I had seen too many of my friends, and including myself, get injured doing the work that we're doing. And I was more passionate about wanting people, the offshore game, it's a tough game. And I wanted people to be able to go home and actually enjoy their hard work with their families. So that was maybe 12, 15 years ago that I jumped onto the safety side, and ever since, went out on my own consulting, and started working with a company called Equilibria, which I know you're very familiar with the e-colors, after seeing the impact they had on the rig that I was operating on, and fundamentally shifting how what we believed about the industry. Like I said, there was a belief that people get hurt in this industry, and we went to work on those core beliefs that maybe we could do this safer, maybe we could be a high performing operation without having to hurt people. And over the course of a couple of weeks, the whole culture on board that rig transformed. And ever since then, been involved with Equilibrium and came into the world of human organization performance when I met you around 2014. And it's just been a fascinating journey since then. Like you say, I've sort of the beauty of the work has taken me all over the world, and some incredible operations that I've seen, and just helping people primarily get home to their families in one piece.
Well, that's fantastic. I want to go back to something you said there, because I think that a lot of people have a belief that I grew up being told, oh, culture is a big ship. It's hard to turn. It takes years, sometimes decades. And the reality is I glommed onto something you said that's been my experience as well. That is, if you're not trying to change the culture, if you're trying to change the language and behaviors of the leaders in the workforce, culture is going to change pretty quickly. Yeah. But if all you're doing is attacking the culture, then it's a big ship. It takes a long time to turn.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And like you say, when it starts with the leaders and using different terminology, different behaviors, it filters down very quickly to the rest of the organization. And that's where the real cultural change can be so quick and so effective, rather than that trying to address it at that cultural level. It just takes a long time and is highly ineffective. So it always starts with the leaders for me.
That really is truly, if you put it in the essential leadership cycle space, self and team awareness. Leaders have to know what they know and what they don't know. They have to know what the workforce knows and doesn't know, so that when they change their language and behaviors, the workforce actually has something that they can see, something that's different, right?
Exactly. And probably just from a cultural shift perspective, the biggest shift that I've seen is in terms of how leaders respond to an event when something bad happens. And if there is an immediate witch hunt for who did it, what are we going to do to them? That culture never shifts. But it's if the leaders can respond to that event and just ask some different questions, like you say, we change some of the language, some of the behaviors, asking the questions. Is everyone okay? Is the environment okay? Is the asset okay? What happened and how did it happen? And really then allowing the rest of the analysis to come out using whatever tools that they've got. That's been the biggest shift that I've seen from a cultural perspective, is just changing how leaders respond to events.
Well, then the organization starts to expect that response instead of the reaction.
Yeah.
Is it? Exactly. Have you seen that there's a personality tendency element associated with leader reactions, and then how they need to shift to responding to failure or success?
Yeah, for sure. And some of us, as many of us know, are more inclined to jump to action, jump to saying something. They're going to ask certain questions. There's definitely a personality element to it. So for those that are more inclined to just want to jump in there and want an answer straight away, I remember when I started as a safety advisor and something would happen on the rig and we would have to file within 3 hours. We needed, management on shore would want to know who did it, what did they do, what are we doing, what's the immediate response, and
why did they do it?
Why do they do it? And in fact, I was trained in the 5 whys, and the 5 whys as a tool is a great causal tool, but we were using it in a way to immediately try and understand, the why something bad happened. And when you're using it that way as the first tool, you're never going to get to the root cause, which is exactly what I was seeing on the rig at the time. Not knowing that it was ineffective in really getting to the root cause. But looking back, I can see we had numerous repeat events because we weren't asking the right questions.
Well, I think that's a great point. It's funny because if you approach, let's just use something like the why analysis or 5 whys. If you approach it as, why did Ian do that? Then you get one group of whys. If you approach it as, how and why did this happen? You get a completely different group of whys. And it's the analytical method that slides between the whys that gathers the information, that takes that information and turns it into data and facts. And then you can actually start to figure out how you need to fix it.
Yeah. The alternative, and I remember when I was involved in an incident where I was carrying a very heavy piece of equipment with a coworker, and he just dropped it, and it hurt my back. And I got questioned, why did you do that? I didn't do anything. And yet,
why did I do what?
Yeah, exactly.
Why did you hurt your back?
And there are organizations. Preventative measures or corrective actions were manual handling training. That wasn't the issue. So we never got to the root cause. And guess what? Did we have more of those events? Absolutely.
Yeah.
So it's just not the most effective tool as a initial as a tool to find out what actually happened in the event.
Yeah, I like to say that asking why is not a data gathering technique. It's an analytical process. Tell me what happened and how it happened. That's data gathering. Exactly. So, and you have to gather data before you move to facts. I've noticed, in our interactions that you've really started using the driving elements a lot. Can you talk a little bit about how you try to drive people back to the driving elements of self and team awareness, shared vision and values, and clear roles and processes in your personal journey as a consultant and a coach and a trainer?
Yeah, sure. In the work that we've done, and in a lot of the coaching, training, and education that I've done over the years, there's a number of great leadership models, and I love the essential leadership cycle because we look at it and typically ask an organization or ask leaders, where are your challenges within the organization? And 90% of the time it's around trust and accountability. And I've never really come across a tool that addresses them in the way that the essential leadership cycle does, by looking at the things that create conditions in which trust and accountability can develop organically rather than try and address it sort of front on. When you can help an organization or help leaders develop self and team awareness and have everyone on the same page in terms of the shared vision and values, and there's a clarity around roles and processes, then trust it's organic. It helps. It just comes naturally as opposed to something you need to enforce on someone. We've been doing a lot of work before COVID anyway, in Nigeria with one of the organizations, big oil company there. And one of the big challenges they were having was around segregated and sort of siloed operation, and where they had business goals and the business unit had their overall goals. Each separate function had their own goals. And what we found was that some of those goals were in direct competition to some of the other functions within the organization. And so they were sort of shooting each other in the foot. And when we looked at the bigger picture using the essential leadership cycle, self and team awareness, we always start there. But when we really started to look at shared vision and values and started to iron out the fact that some of the vision of each function is in direct competition with the other one, we could address the issue that was then creating a lot of mistrust between functions. No one trusted whether they were getting the information they actually needed. The other function was actually giving them what they needed. So we took a sort of a step back in a bigger picture and asked them, well, how are they as a function, whether it's drilling or completions or what planning, whatever their function was, how is that contributing to the overall bigger picture of the business unit goal. And the sort of the feedback that we've gotten from there is that they're working as holistically more as one team than they ever have in the past, even in this very challenging environment that we're in right now.
Well, one of the things that I've run across since COVID is that if managers and senior leaders went into this COVID challenge, the pandemic, with the tools, then they're going to use the tools.
Yeah.
If they didn't, then they're constantly searching for, okay, how do I manage this chaotic environment that I've found myself in?
Yeah.
So I've seen a lot of people migrate towards tools like the Essential Leadership Cycle to help them understand how they can manage the systems that they've now found themselves in.
Yeah, and I'm exactly the same. And again, what I really like and what I see a lot of people sort of latch onto with the Essential Leadership Cycle is the fact that they can just focus on those driving elements rather than having to. It's not that you don't focus on trust and diversity, inclusion and commitment and et cetera, et cetera. It's not that you don't focus on them, but it's that, okay, well, if we're having challenges in these other areas, whether it's accountability or learning and continuous improvement, let's just take it back. Let's have a look at where we're at in these first three driving elements. There's a simplicity to that is really, a lot of people really latch onto, and I love the model for that aspect of it. It's just an easy to use model that is so effective.
Fixing things at the source or the driving elements instead of constantly trying to fix the condition.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. You're probably one of the best consultants in the world at the human element. I'm shifting gears a little bit here. As the shipping industry moves towards their version of human performance, human organizational performance, tell us a little bit about your vision for helping the shipping industry with the human element, as they call it.
Yeah, well, the human performance as a science, as you're well aware, is started in the nuclear industry and in the aftermath of some very significant events. And it took a while before it sort of progressed into other industries, whether it's airlines or oil and gas, construction, or the other sort of industries. In the shipping industry, whilst they do have some tools and some focus here, there's the real shift towards the human element as the next sort of step change in safety in that industry. And we've learned a lot over the past. I know Fisher Improvement Technologies learned a lot from the many deployments that have done across multiple industries, and we couldn't be in a better position to really help the shipping industry implement proven strategies that can help the organization address the human element, what they're naming the term, to address and reduce the likelihood that people are going to make mistakes. They still see, shipping still sees human factor, the human element, as one of the key sources of challenges in the industry. So I couldn't think of a better organization in terms of addressing that and helping them implement a lot of the strategies that we use and have used for many years with different industries now in shipping. And in terms of the ability to deliver, COVID's done, COVID is, it's been a challenge for everyone. One thing it's certainly done for, whether it's our organization, whether it's for many different organizations, is shift material virtually, virtual delivery. And I don't think there's an industry that's more conducive to virtual delivery than shipping. So, you got people out, it's very hard to get people from ships into one place at one time. And they're out there for months at a time. And it's not that conducive to have a consultant go out on the ship for months at a time either. So I don't think there's a better industry that's more ready and prepared for virtual delivery that's now available to address the human element.
Yeah, I completely agree. And being able to map, we sat down and mapped what the probable human element characteristics in shipping to what we've already learned over 25 years through human performance, human error reduction, human and organizational performance, advanced error reduction. And that map was pretty holistic in the way that it serves getting better very quickly in that human element characteristic.
Yeah, absolutely. And getting down to that granular level of written procedural excellence and helping, a lot of the working with some of the companies that we work with in shipping, and a lot of the root cause that they'll get to in their analysis comes down to either procedure inadequate or procedure not followed. What we know, from the work that we do is the amount of error traps that are actually written into procedures. So even helping them at that level to, not write error traps in the procedures, make them the most robust procedures, such that end user who's actually out there using them is less likely to make a mistake on any given task.
Yeah, I mean, you could even push that to deviation analysis, where when they say procedure wasn't followed, do they really understand how it wasn't followed? Do they really understand whether there were systemic drivers associated with that? You can't just stop at wasn't followed, and deviation analysis helps people do that. So again, it's a more holistic look at problems they think they've got solved, but keep coming up and up and up and up and up.
Exactly.
Yeah. Shift gears one more time on you. You have done some pretty extreme world traveling. What are some of your favorite places that you've gone? Probably the listening audience doesn't know Ian has actually gone to North Korea and done some work over there. Tell people a little bit about what you did over there and why you did that.
It started, I've always had a fascination with the place. And I stumbled across an opportunity to go there. There's a Singapore-based, I was living in Singapore at the time, there's a Singapore-based charity that actually teaches entrepreneurship in North Korea as a way to try and create a healthier civil society. And what surprises a lot of people is that there is actually quite a pronounced culture of entrepreneurship in North Korea. And it very much comes from, if we think about it from a systemic point of view, how does that happen? It comes largely from the fact that in the 90s, there was some pretty drastic and catastrophic famines that devastated the country. And whilst there's no official figures, there's likely millions of people sort of perished. And in North Korea, you're either in the army or you've got a government job or something else. And those people that relied on the government subsistence plan, during that time were the ones that really perished. And so this sort of black market, or rather a grey market of entrepreneurs, people were just sort of buying and selling and trading whatever they could purely out of a need for survival. And it was actually largely driven by, whilst it's a very patriarchal society, it's largely driven by the women because they're the ones going to market. They're the ones sort of training. And it still happens to this day. So there's this entrepreneurial sort of spirit, but what they lack is any sort of formal education in how do you take something that's a great idea and turn it into something of value for the local market. So we're, the charities there, sort of addressing that need. Again, primarily, to just try and make a difference and open up dialogue with North Korea and the outside world. And I mean, it's a fascinating place. And, there's I think the biggest thing that hit me was going in, reading as much as I could, and just the way, the North Koreans are portrayed as this sort of robotic, brainwashed sort of people. The only way to really get anywhere in that society is by absolute, it's a class structure. So you're either hostile, neutral or loyal to the regime, and that's why you see them sort of showing absolute devotion, whether or not they believe in the politics. I don't know, but they certainly wouldn't tell me. But I think what the biggest thing that struck me is that at the end of the day, they're just human beings. They just want a better life for themselves, and they're just born into a very unique system that there's certain things they need to do to survive and make that better life for themselves and their family.
Well, I think that when you were first started talking about going there, and then after you went, one of the things that I realized was, maybe as humans, we need to separate the politics from the people.
Yeah.
And when you talk about or to the people, they're not making these policies that the globe pays attention to. But there are people everywhere that have needs. I mean, the whole Maslow's hierarchy of needs thing doesn't change because of a border. And I just appreciate that you see it as helping people, regardless of where those people are. I think you do that in your life, and I think you do that in your business as well.
Yeah. And yeah, I appreciate you saying that, Rob. And maybe just to say a bit more just about the system, certainly, from what I've observed, and North Korea became North Korea in the Korean War when they split the peninsula, and they had a brutal occupation by the Japanese colonialists prior to that. And when World War II, whether or not it came to an end, it certainly had a big impact. When they dropped the bombs, when the bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the North Koreans saw that to one of their biggest enemies. It had a big impact on their psyche, and they got obsessed with creating, becoming a nuclear power. So even from a systemic perspective, where does that obsession come from? It's very much driven by, the system.
Yeah. And the things that have happened in the past.
Okay.
And well, partially fear, but partially joy that there was a mechanism that the little person could fight back to the big person.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. Amazing. So, what's next for you, Ian? I hear you've got a book coming out, and what's your next adventure? You've moved now from old and dreary Bali into vibrant and sunny London, and
Yeah. I have.
no roosters in the background anymore.
No roosters in the background anymore. Not waking me up at 3:00 in the morning. It's been quite I've spent 2 years living in beautiful Bali, Indonesia, which was amazing on so many levels, and it was a great base to be out of. And
when you could travel.
Yeah, when I could travel, and part of COVID has been that inability to travel, and thought I'd like a bit of a change of scene and come to be with some family here in London, heading into a winter, which is going to be quite a difference than what I'm used to. But yeah, I do actually have a book coming out soon, and got invited to be a collaborator on an anthology entitled Letters to My 10-Year-Old Self. And it's really about, if you had the opportunity to write your 10-year-old self a letter, what would you share with them? What would you say? Not that it's intended that you could change the past or anything like that, but what would you want to say to them? So I've really loved the whole process of writing something, and the intent is to be published by the end of the year. So it's quite exciting, and there's some beautiful sort of life lessons in there. And I mean, if I'd told myself at 10 years old I'd be doing what I'm doing, I wouldn't believe it. It's been a sort of a fascinating journey in a lot of respects, and now I'm here, in the UK, and looking forward to serving whoever I can serve here, and from a error reduction perspective, from a understanding personalities, and really just helping them unlock their own either personal potential or unlock the potential within the organization, and really create value where I can, and in the same way that I go to North Korea is to just try and make a difference with as many people as I possibly can in this lifetime.
That's fantastic, and I'm looking forward to reading about that. Was it somewhat cathartic to have to sit down and think about those things, and did it? Were there some things that shocked you when you started trying to put things in a linear way in the way your life turned out?
Yeah, it's I think it is definitely cathartic. It was to be able to sort of go back and just reflect on so look, there's some great things that have happened in my life, and there's some really hard things as well, and to really, I wanted the piece to be part anecdotal, part sort of personal development, and just some of the things that I've learned along the way. Whether it's been going through a marriage breakup and the heartache involved with that, making a lot of money, losing a lot of money, just things that hopefully, people can, whilst I don't wish any of those things on anyone, maybe some people can relate to them, and they've had a relationship that didn't work out, and there's been a lot of heartache, and what did it take to really heal from that? It's just, again, it's something that if it makes a difference to one person, then I'll be happy with that. We're part of the journey, and certainly from part of the journey for me is to go from the culture I grew up in Australia, where we're very much taught that, real men don't cry. And I remember that lesson coming through really, loud and clear as growing up, particularly playing some pretty hard, sports like Australian rules and so on, which are very tough, physical. And I remember being about 13, 14, playing a game of Australian rules football, and one of the opposition players just took exception to me for some reason and punched me in the face. And it shocked me to the point where I started crying. And I remember the trainer came out in the field and was like, "Don't cry." And I couldn't believe it. And, so I grew up learning to repress my emotions. And the challenge with that, particularly amongst men that I've seen, and I actually do a lot of work with a charity in Western Australia called Zero to Hero, which is about empowering young people to be mental health champions, because again, particularly with men, we're not taught how to really express ourselves, express our emotions, and the challenge that has in Australia particularly, and a lot of other Western countries, is that suicide is the highest, it's the highest cause of death for men aged between 15 and 40, which to me, particularly in a place like Australia that's so beautiful and so amazing, it still shocks me that that's the case. And so, part of that book is just sharing about what it's taken me to really tap into being able to just be with emotions and express them in a healthy way, that doesn't lead to, going down a dark tunnel and depressive places, which I know particularly now in this COVID environment, and there's a lot of people having challenges with. So I think if anything, it's intending to let people know that there's help available, and it's okay. If you need to cry, cry. It's okay to express your emotions.
Yeah, that's a small thing. I always like the cliche, never try to create a permanent solution to a temporary problem.
Yeah, and, I like that.
Specifically related to bad outcomes like we're discussing.
And there's something else I think I'll add to the chapter is, the first 40 years of childhood are the hardest. So,
you want me to tell you what the next 23 look like? Oh, they get much, much easier.
Good to know.
Yeah. I hope you stay with it all along the way with me.
Yeah.
I'm just looking for you young folks to watch you come up through some of the joys. But, in the end, standing on top of Kilimanjaro was very, I don't know what the word is, but it going to that apex was really representative of where your life is taking you.
Yeah. And I've had a couple of experiences on mountains and volcanoes, and there's just something about them that really, it's certainly my experience anyway. I've had to tap into something deep within myself to really reach that summit. And the one thing they never tell you about mountains is that it's worse coming down. It's just,
So, I mean, circling it all the way back to where we started, back to that self-awareness piece, I think that if we start there and understand there's more after it, that self-awareness is the start of a journey, and it's continual. And it's very, very important. And a lot of us think that we know ourselves until we start trying to actually be intentionally self-aware.
Yeah, exactly. And exactly like climbing a mountain, until we put ourselves in a position where we're really called to be and really challenged, we think we know ourselves. There's layers to it. It's like an onion, and you can keep peeling it back. But like you say, it's where we need to start. Yeah. But it's a process that's ongoing.
Well, Ian, I'm going to give you a little plug. Ian is available on our website, online.improvewithfit.com, as a virtual coach. Certainly, if he can travel to you, he will. But he provides virtual coaching. You can see a lot of his information on the safetycoach.com.au.
Safetycoach.com.
Yeah, safetycoach.com. And we have a bunch of cross links. Ian, is there anything that I should have asked you about or you want to talk about that I didn't?
No, I think we've covered quite a lot today, and I've really enjoyed where the conversation's gone, and I think there's a lot in there. I'm sure we'll have other opportunities to unpack it some more at other times. No, I think it's been most enjoyable.
For sure. All right. Well, thank you very much, Ian, for coming on. Again, you can see him on our website, or you can get to Ian through the safetycoach.com. And I want to thank Ian. I've been your host and intentional leader, Rob Fisher. Thanks for joining us again on the Essential Leadership Cycle podcast. And remember, intentional leadership starts with you.
The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the host and its guest and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the company. Examples of analysis discussed within this podcast are only examples. They should not be utilized in the real world as the only solution available, as they are based only on very limited and dated open source information. Assumptions made within this analysis are not reflective of the position of the company. No part of this podcast may be reproduced, stored in a retrieval system, or transmitted in any form or by any means, mechanical, electronic, recording, or otherwise, without prior written permission of the creator of the podcast, Jay Allen.